Craig Pinkney, it's a pleasure to meet you. Something different for us because obviously we're in inclusion sport, and we obviously work around inclusion and support different schools, colleges, and around the country. We talk about what we do for wheelchair basketball and promoting inclusion across the country and Birmingham and the West Midlands. But we thought we'd do a twist. So it's a pleasure to meet you. Obviously, please introduce yourself.
So I'm Craig Pinkney. Sometimes I don't know what hat I'm wearing on most days. So I'm a youth worker. I'm a criminologist. But ultimately, I kind of specialize in working with young people that are involved in serious gangs and youth violence. So I've kind of had about 16 years of experience working in residential care. I've managed a number of youth centres, done detached youth work, outreach work, done work in youth offending, work inside of the prison estate, child secure units, lectured in youth and community studies for about 7 years at local university in Birmingham, and currently doing my PhD around youth violence in Birmingham, specifically around gun and gang crime, and also a advisor and a consultant for a number of organisations such as Norfolk County Council, as well as the Violent Reduction Unit in Nottingham and in Birmingham, Police and Crime Commissioner, and also internationally I'm a consultant and advisor for the Ministry of Justice in Jamaica, around supporting them and developing strategies to reduce issues around violence. So yeah, I've also got a number of research reports and articles that are out that kind of encompasses some of the stuff that I'll be talking about with you all today.
I mean, it's a pleasure to meet you. I saw one of your presentations at Queen Alexandra College, because I work at Queen Alexandra College. Oh, yeah. and it was amazing to hear your take on knife crime and gangs, and your role playing story was absolutely amazing. Talking about the 7 mistakes.
Yeah, 7 mistakes.
So it's really interesting for us as a group and as a community to understand, because we're all about inclusion, but it's that inclusion and diversity I see go hand in hand, because we're talking about the community as a whole. Obviously, we've got Owen Lamprey from Clifton Primary School and the lead practitioner in health and wellbeing, and we've also got Hannah Reid from School Games Organisers, who works in primary and secondary schools.
Yes.
Thinking about where you started and thinking about, I also used to work with Catch 22 many years ago and Positive Future. So I was brought up in we lived for 20 years in Poole Farm, which is one of the most deprived areas in the city. So we worked with Catch 22, and a lot of them were referrals from young people who were drug related or gang related, but they wanted to play sport or do some things that get them out of that kind of environment. You talk about gangs exit strategies and what you do. What for you? What's motivated you and inspired you to support that?
I think my inspiration comes from my grandparents. My family are quite well known in the West Midlands, Birmingham specifically. My grandmother, during the Windrush era, started a community project called the Nightingale Project. And she started that from her household. So all young people during that time that were, I guess, victims of forms of racism and whatnot in the local community, it was kind of like a safe house for children and young people. And it was also a place where they would be educated and have positive opportunities. And for those that know about Birmingham, we had at that time the Muhammad Ali Centre, and Muhammad Ali came to Birmingham. And my grandmother was one of the pioneers that opened that building. And apparently Muhammad Ali was at my grandma's house drinking tea. Now, I probably was just running around at that time. I didn't realize or even acknowledge someone like Muhammad Ali. But that's what my family ultimately are known for. So I got loads of aunties and uncles that are involved in community activism, race relations. So I would say it's kind of in the blood to do stuff with community. And I think young people has just been my passion. So I would say I'm motivated more so by them, really, to get them to recognize and acknowledge that there's more to life than the choices that they're oftentimes making, but also acknowledging that the challenges, or what I call the trap, if you remember what I spoke about before, is designed for them to fall in it. And my role is to show that I can come from the hood, I can come from the block, and I can leave school with no GCSEs, but we're doing a PhD how many years later?
It does. I mean, it's quite interesting because I say when we lived in that part of our, for 20 years, and the funny thing was working in those kind of groups and environment, you get to understand people more. And it was strange because you could go out your house and you'd see a gang across the road all sitting there, and they say, "Oh, I know where you live now, Andy, but do you know what? I'll look after your place for you because you do great things with us." And it's like, well, that's really unreal. But also, in some respects, that's a community feeling, but also a positive thing because we're actually working with them to have more positive attitudes and outcomes. I'm going to hand over to Owen Lamprey. Owen, I'm going to let Owen ask some questions if that's okay with you. Owen, over to you.
Hi, Craig. Thanks very much for meeting us. Andy's obviously from a sporting background, as are we. I just wondered what your views on how sport can play a role in attempting to alleviate some of the issues that you've obviously dedicated most of your life to.
I think sport is an amazing tool. I'm going to frame this response under the guise of a concept called desistance. Now, I argue that desistance is something that most professionals don't even look at. And desistance writers say, if we focus more on desistance, we would have more of a reduction in the issues that we're facing. And just in a summary, all desistance means is a process that causes criminals or people that are engaged in antisocial behavior to deter away from that particular type of behavior. And desistance writers talk about a series of things that can be used to desist young people. So they talk about things like sport. They talk about things like faith. They talk about things like informal education, positive social bonds, meaning individuals that they know, that they can rely on, that they can connect to. They talk about having job opportunities. They talk about having positive relationships, meaning having a girlfriend, having a boyfriend, settling down, or having children. So the reason why I mentioned sport being the first one, because sport is actually quite significant. And if you look at the histories of individuals that have committed crime or lived a life of crime, that have come into contact with sport, they'll tell you that sport was their lifesaver. Sport was an opportunity for them to desist from the things that they were involved in. Why? Because the sports that they were engaged in required discipline. The sport that they were engaged in required a level of commitment and sacrifice. So whilst that commitment and sacrifice is required from that particular sport, it's important to understand what the sport presents. But I would also add on, when we're talking about sport, is what types of sport. Because when we're talking about young men that are hyper-masculine, for example, things like football may not be the only sport to engage them at that particular time. What about things like boxing? And we can see the stories of Mike Tyson, Anthony Joshua's, and so on and so forth, when we're talking about high extreme contact sports, actually had a benefit. American football, rugby, high impact sports, mixed martial arts. Now, interestingly enough, when I do stuff in schools and I talk to teachers or pastoral leads about things like MMA, boxing, mixed martial arts, or whatever it is, they generally say things like, "Oh, no, that's a bit too dangerous." But there's actually no research that suggests that if you teach young people boxing, mixed martial arts, or make them do a high impact sport, that they're going to start going out the following day and punching everybody in their local community. Why? Because if you know boxing, you never go into boxing on the first day and start punching people in the ring. You've got to learn the stance. You've got to learn boxing. You've got to do pad work for a long period of time. And then when you're worthy, then you can go and get 2 minutes in the ring. So it's a process. And that process, what sport ultimately do, gives young people confidence, gives them an opportunity to follow rules and boundaries and understand authority. So when we're talking about young people in a school setting or going home and having to listen to authority, whether that's mom, dad, or a guardian or a school teacher, they're able to conform to that. So school plays an amazing role in terms of doing that. But I think it's important for those that work with children and young people that provide sport to understand two things: the context of what young people are in right now, and also the different types of activities can be used. So the first category for me is really important. And it's interesting that you asked me that, because I spoke to two sports coaches yesterday, basketball coaches, and they're writing a funding bid. So they said to me, Craig, what is the most one of the most important things that are impacting young people? And I said it's a number of things. But I said one of the key things that's been spoken about right now is the rise of organized criminal groups, street gangs, and county lines. Their response to me was, what is county lines? And I got scared when I hear things like that, because I'm saying you're sports coaches, so that means you don't function in the concept of school in a formal way like a PE teacher. You're actually in the community engaging with young people every day. So if you don't know what county lines is, that's a really big concern of me, because your focus is so much to sport and the passion of sport, which is good, but you have to also understand the context in which young people are coming from, because there may be a reason why they're carrying knives to training. There may be a reason why they're carrying weapons to training. And I think that understanding, is just as important as utilizing sport to engage with children and young people.
That's absolutely fascinating, and reaffirms some of the things I think that we believe in this sector as well. It's also interesting because I listened to Clinton Morrison the other day, who basically suggested that it was football and his idea of being a professional footballer that in effect, he didn't use the word saved him, but encouraged him to take that line rather than other lines. Yes. And I've also got children at my school who are working with a guy called Colin Treasure in terms of mixed martial arts at a brilliant gym in Highgate. And that is having a really positive impact on their lives as well, and their behaviour back in there. And the relationship between the school and sports coaches, I think, is really important. I think all three of us also work and possibly live in areas which are socio-economically deprived. Yes. So I've got a question on how closely you think that's linked to gang violence. And then also moving on from that, I as a parent have taken quite a deliberate choice that when we're talking about sport, that my children have taken part in teams and attended venues which are also in socio-economically deprived areas. So I'm talking about he plays basketball in Nechells, playing table tennis and tennis in Perry Bar. And me, as a white working class teacher, I think that kind of social mixing is really important.
Yes.
But it's something that doesn't often happen for the pupils at my school. So they don't often get the chance to work with adults or other children who are outside their geographical area. I just wondered your views on that.
No, I think that's spot on. And I would say that's probably more so something that I probably experienced when I was growing up, because I come from a background of basketball. I used to play for Birmingham Bullets, if you remember Bullets. Yeah. And I ruptured my anterior cruciate ligament in 2005, which completely took me out of the sport. And I would say, even though it was probably the most devastating and stressful time in my life, that's what birthed my role as youth work. So I do believe that everything happens for a reason, because it was through that stressful moment, someone had said to me, you know what, you'd be a good youth worker because you've got all of the skills and qualities. But back to the point, the school that I used to go to in inner city Birmingham, it's closed now. It used to be Cardinal Newman Roman Catholic School. It used to be based in Bearwood. And the area that I grew up in Hockley, the only interaction that I had, I would say, with white people was the Irish family on the corner and the Kavanagh family and the Callahan family that were at my school, which were both Irish families. And as my dad would always say, is that the Irish are just like us, they're cool, let them through. So it was only until I got to college where I would say, and it sounds very strange coming from me, that I actually had my first experience with different white people, if that makes sense, from different backgrounds and different spaces. And I just remember I had friends from Sutton, I had friends from like Worcester. And it was just, for me, it was just a cultural shock, because all I've ever seen and ever grew up knowing was African Caribbean communities, Bangladeshi and Pakistani communities, and again, the couple Irish families that are on the corner. So when we understood the concept of being white, unless it was someone in authority or Paddy on the corner, that was our only understanding of who they were. So going to college and having a coach that was white, having different types of friends was good for me from an opportunity, because I would argue that when we talk about like race hate, when we talk about prejudice, unconscious bias, a lot of that kind of stems from not having the opportunity to see others from with difference. So our only understanding of whiteness when I was growing up was oppression. So any white man have only come to exclude us, or they've come to arrest us. And I would say the same thing would probably happen with children that come from poor economic backgrounds, that come from whiter areas, probably have the same perspective of black males as well. The only depiction that you see is something negative on the media, or I'm a celebrity or a sportsman. There's not the in-between. And in both sides of the table, whether you're black or whether you're white, young people's understanding is generally that, well, I'm only going to judge based on what I constantly see all the time. So now we're talking about issues of things like gun and knife crime. The way the media project it on social media platforms, that individuals that look like me are the ones that seem to be causing the problems. And as a ripple effect on that, it does two things. One, nationally, it helps towards or contributes towards people's ignorance about particular groups. But what it also does is for young people is that they also believe the stereotype. So when they're out and about in the local community, they view each other as individuals that are a threat or a danger, and then things potentially can happen around that. So I think that when we're talking about sport, and going back to the original question that you asked, sport is really good because it has the opportunity to enable young people to meet others with difference, to engage with other people from difference, whether that is from a coach, whether that's a support worker, whether that is parents from another family, just to see difference and enable people to kind of have the opportunity to kind of challenge some of their stereotypes that they may have grew with for many years, if that answers your question.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Andy, am I allowed one more?
Of course, of course.
Yeah, okay. I'm getting a bit greedy here because it's a really interesting one. I've looked at some of your work, and you talk about a culture of fear, shame, and trauma,
yes.
Affecting the way that young males in particular, but young
yes.
people then have in their minds to then go and act in a particular way.
Yes.
What can we do in schools to address those fears and ideas of shame?
I think it's about being trauma informed. So it's more than just having a passion. It's more than just having a passion to want to engage with children and young people. But I think it's also about training and an investment of your school into individuals like yourself to have an understanding about trauma and the impact of trauma and the ripple effect of trauma and the impact that may have, not just on that particular child or young person, but also peers that are exposed to that particular display of traumatic experiences. So what I mean by trauma informed is that you go through a series of training, or you have individuals like myself that you can consult with, that kind of talks about a series of scenarios, because the reality is that children and young people come with baggage, and that baggage can cause a ripple effect on education. And unfortunately, because a lot of teachers are not trauma informed, the easiest thing for a teacher to do is remove that child from the classroom, because they may be disturbing the other 27 pupils that are in the room at that time. But the problem is that when that child is then removed from the classroom, and then there's not adequate support, or there's individuals that don't understand the trauma, the shame, the guilt, and all of those things that impact on that young person about trauma, oftentimes that young person does something and they get excluded. They have to go to a pupil referral unit. And what I argue is that that's when the criminal justice pipeline starts. And there's been loads of literature that now talks about this idea about the school to prison pipeline. Because the moment they're out of mainstream education, you and I know that their chances and their vulnerabilities go even higher based on the issues that they're ultimately presented with. So if somebody's facing trauma in a nutshell, their trauma needs to be engaged. And I'm not saying or suggesting that teachers need to be counselors or therapists, but being trauma informed to understand the basis of certain types of behaviors comes from somewhere. So if a child's seeing domestic violence at home, it may mess up their first 2 hours of school. If they're not having breakfast because they haven't eaten, loads of literature in that, we understand that part. You know, it's going to impact the way that they concentrate in school. And the same way in terms of young people being affected by mental health, fear going to school because they're worried about crossing through postcodes, jumping on a particular type of bus, feeling that they might need to carry a weapon to school because of them being concerned and what the school shouldn't do is, I guess, make the assumption that all young people are the same of the reasons why they carry weapons and treat them all the same. I think this is where schools can have the opportunity where they're very skillful in how they engage with each case. Of course, you're going to have those children and young people that come to school with knives because they probably want to harm other young people. But are they the same as the individuals that carried a knife because they got robbed on a school bus the day before? I don't think that they are. So I think it's unfair sometimes that we make those decisions because we're using the policy around safeguarding to make that choice. And I think when you look at some of the Ofsted reports that's come out over the last 12 months, they talk about this idea about excluding a child from school that has to be the last resort. And I think what a lot of people have done in the past is they've hid behind policies around safeguarding of other children and young people in the school and said, if you've got a knife or you've done something like that, we're just going to exclude you. And it's the easiest option to do. And I don't think for all young people that is the case. And I'll just say in conclusion, I was working with a young man, academically talented, but his friend got robbed on the bus the day before. And you also got to bear in mind the culture as well of young people, which goes back to your second question, because understanding the culture of what's out there in the local community, what Facebook, what YouTube, what Instagram is telling young people, if you get attacked, you should carry a weapon to protect yourself. So young people are adopting these cultures, and he's put a knife in his bag because if his friend got robbed and he's told himself that that's not going to happen to him. He hasn't told mom, he hasn't told dad, a fear that they were going to overreact. He's gone to school and told a friend that he's got a knife. That friend's then told someone else. That other person's told someone else. Somebody's told a teacher, and a teacher searched his bag and found a knife, and then he got suspended from school. And in that particular scenario, when you actually look at the context, very different to a young person going with the intention to harm other young people.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for all your time and taking on your point about consultation. I'll be consulting you very soon, hopefully, if that's all right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Owen. Thanks, Craig. Hannah, have you got any questions for Craig?
Yeah, I've got 3 as well, Andy.
Okay. Go on. Hannah wrote that extra one after.
Yeah, I did have 2, now I've got 3. Craig, thanks for meeting us. Lovely to meet you. Obviously, with the current circumstances, we've become more heavily reliant on the use of social media, and I know you've done some work around that. So how, pre-COVID-19, how instrumental is that to obviously young people and gang violence? But are you expecting to see potentially more of an issue now that we've become more heavily reliant on social media?
2-part question. I'm going to answer the last one first.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do, so recently, I'm not sure if you were aware, the National Youth Agency released a report called Out of Sight. Not sure if you've read it, but that was talking about specifically all of the vulnerabilities. So I sit on an expert group with the National Youth Agency. So if you just go to Google and type NYA for National Youth Agency, COVID report, an amazing report will come out, and it will talk all about some of those things that you're mentioning about since COVID-19, how 700,000 young people that were potentially NEET are now even more so vulnerable than they were during COVID-19. Young people that are involved in or in contact with children's services and so forth, they're even more vulnerable. But also the young people that are socially included, that are not necessarily involved in any form of antisocial behavior or criminality, are just as vulnerable. And another report that's coming out next week, so keep your eyes out. I will post it online. I'll probably send it to Andy also too. That's going to talk specifically about gangs and exploitation. And what I'm potentially arguing is that during COVID-19, because of stress, because of fatigue, and those young people that are staying indoors, they're utilizing social media a lot more. So it's not just necessarily about deviant cultures in terms of gangs taunting each other and disrespecting each other. You've also got the young people that are not necessarily involved, but are observing these behaviors online. And then also you've got, remember, Instagram live feeds where individuals are talking to each other, they're arguing with each other, and they're utilizing social media platform as an opportunity to get some popularity to themselves or their group, but they're being watched by entertainers, and those people that are watching them oftentimes are our young people that are probably most vulnerable. And I think secondly, it's about what platforms too. So as you know, TikTok, House Party are two probably new apps that are probably used a lot more so now during COVID-19. And there was an article that I did a couple of weeks ago with the Vice newspaper. I'm not sure if some of you caught it. There's been a number of shootings that have happened nationally, quite more specifically in Birmingham. There's been about 4 shootings if you've been watching the news. And 2 of them was a direct result of social media and House Party, where young people are talking on this platform. And the way that I understand the dynamics is that if I'm following you, for example, hey, Hannah, if I'm your friend, I can find out who you're talking to, and I can come into your chat without your permission. So you can be talking to a group of friends and I can come in. And what's been happening with young people is that they've had people that are in opposing gangs that are jumping in through their friends and basically threatening each other. And there's one incident where an individual showed a firearm and another individual taunted another young person about someone that got murdered in Birmingham last year. And that would have been the direct response to the shooting that happened in one of the local areas, based on my intelligence and the young people that I work with. So social media has been used for those particular reasons. To your first question, I think that creating what I would say counter narratives are important. And what I mean by counter narratives is the work that we as professionals do on social media platforms to constantly put up narratives that are opposing the negative things that they watch. Now, I guess the biggest challenge that I'm sure we always know is that our counter narratives are never going to compete with the celebrities that have got blue ticks. They're never going to compete with the rappers, the football stars, any other type of celebrity. However, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't put the counter narrative out. And I think that whilst we kind of utilize, the same platforms like this, stuff like this should be uploaded onto YouTube. It's classified as a counter narrative. Why? Because I'm sure that there's going to be a number of teachers watching this. There's going to be a number of parents possibly watching this that can think, you know what, Andy, this was a smart idea, putting this onto YouTube. Now, you may get only 255 views, but in my estimation, that's 255 people that have watched something positive, as opposed to constantly just seeing negative things being projected on the social media platforms. So what I'm saying is young people then have an option. Adults have an option. Everybody has an option to choose what they want to watch versus what they don't watch. And unfortunately, because there's only negative things that are online and are on TV, young people are only going to watch the things that's ultimately out there. So I think that this is where we have the role to play. So we can do it as Zoom things like this and project them. We can have, I don't know, Andy could do a show every week with the teachers and have a topic and talk about that topic. Owen can do something about the role of sport and young people in the community. And I'm going to say it again, we may only get 100 views. We may get only 200 views. And maybe some days we get 1,000 views. But guess what? That's 1,000 people that has taken the opportunity to watch that. And those individuals that are watching these particular things can send that on to other parents and to other people that are asking the exact same questions as you. Because I can guarantee Hannah and Owen, the questions that you guys are asked, there's somebody in Norfolk asking the same question. There's somebody in Hertfordshire asking the exact same question. And I just think that the counter narratives we should be more creative in how we utilize that, and just nationally not having this kind of blasé thought that because we can't engage with young people physically, we can't use the power of social media to engage with them.
I think, you raise a really good point, actually. Especially now, you see a lot of the news is all very negative. And, we're struggling to see the positive things. I think, and the media's to blame for this because they want to sell a story. But obviously that doesn't do our young people any good to constantly see bad things happening, negative things reported. So yeah, really useful insight there. My second question is, how instrumental has your own experiences in obviously younger life sort of then helped young people that you've been working with? Like, have they understood you a little bit more, your message?
It depends on what type of young person I'm working with. And I would say that that's dependent on what that young person's ultimately been involved in. You know, county lines didn't exist in the way that it does now when I was younger. And I'm not one of those workers that say, oh, back in my day, this is how things were. I don't do that with young people. I think that's the worst thing to do with young people in 2020 and beyond. But what I try to do is, based on my experiences and the intimate conversations that I've had with young people that have made bad choices, young people that have ended up going to prison for life, individuals that have lost their lives, that have had those intimate relationships with, is utilize those stories and those narratives to meet young people where they're at. So, for example, currently I'm doing some work with Norfolk County Council, specifically around COVID-19, around engaging with their high-risk cases. So when their high-risk cases generally come through, I go out on the street and meet them, because they're not staying in their house, so there needs to be an intervention to engage with them on the street. So when I meet these particular young men, you know, I'll have a guy that, you know, he has an ambition to want to be the leading gangster in Great Yarmouth. But based on my experiences, I've never necessarily been a gangster, but I've known quite a few based on the work that I've ultimately done. So there's two things that I would generally do. I always start off working with young people and saying that the whole role, or my role with them, is to give them foresight, to show them that the journey that they're going down is going to end up in two particular types of ways. And they may not see it right now, but hopefully through the discussions that me and you have will enable you to probably see what particular choices you make can end you up in these particular types of spaces. And then the second thing that I'll also do is that, because I mentor a lot of young men that have just come out of prison, I'll use the virtual conversation. So I will involve them into a conversation. So, for example, a young man that's just come out of prison, but he's been out 8 months now, that well known in Birmingham for the wrong reasons at one particular point. So I will use him because he's got the direct live experience, and I would use him through like WhatsApp call to have a conversation with that young person whilst I'm there, to talk about what prison's like, you know, and it's one of those kind of risky interventions, but good if you're able to manage it properly and supervise it properly. So, for example, the same young man that thinks he's a gangster, when I put him on the mobile phone to my young man, first question he said to him was, "Why are you acting like that on the phone?" So no disrespect, man, but in Birmingham, you wouldn't last. And you seen him go from 10 to 2. And that 10 to 2 wasn't to disrespect him, but just to show him that if you want to be a gangster, you're going to have to function at a different frequency, because no gangster meets someone for the first time and starts talking about all the crimes that they've been involved in. So it's getting that young person to also realize and recognize that the showing off and the bravado that oftentimes they project, it's not going to work in different types of environments. And that's what I mean by foresight, because the way in which you're behaving right now is going to put you in a situation within the next couple of weeks, in the next couple of months. So you're not going to last. And I can't tell you what life choice to make. If you want to be a gangster, I can't stop you. But what I can do is let you know what's going to happen. And as I say to young people all the time, if that's the road that you still want to go down, and you're prepared to do 33 years and find out that your best friend's dating your sister or dating your girlfriend, if you're prepared for people to ignore you, if you're prepared to possibly get bullied and go to prison and possibly involved or get into a situation where you become so ill because of your mental well-being, if you're prepared to go through all of that and destroy your family and community, then I can't stop you. But what I can give you is foresight. And I think that is the kind of approach of youth work practice, is building that trust, building that relationship, getting young people to see themselves in a different life and giving them that counter narrative. And then it's whether they're willing to be on that counter narrative. And then lastly, also acknowledging that the door needs to remain open. And what I mean by the door remaining open is that because the intervention is not working right this minute, I don't shut the door and say, well, it's not working, I don't want to work with you. It's letting you know that the door's always open, because at any moment, you may change. You know, young people have epiphany moments. We've had epiphany moments where you just change. I remember, you know, being 17, 18, I think I might have been, and I was with my cousin, and he got into some argument with a guy, and the guy brandished a firearm. Nothing to do with me, but the guy wanted to shoot me. And that was my reality. Like, listen, this is not my world. I'm trying to be a youth worker out here. So I realized that that wasn't for me. So at that moment, if I didn't have a youth worker that I may have probably disrespected or said something rude to 2 years ago, if that youth worker didn't leave their door open for me, I don't know where I would have been. But that's why I always say that depending on my experiences may have similarities, but also may be very different in today's context. Because now we have social media, now we have different ways of communicating and engaging. And that's one thing I always try to do, is not limit myself in my engagement based on my understanding. And any youth worker, I wouldn't say youth worker, I would say more workers that only have lived experiences do that, where they come with their story and they only have their story. And I would argue that that story doesn't bring young people from A to B. What it does do is enable you to engage and function at a certain frequency, but it doesn't enable you to be A and B. And that's why I'm a big advocate of people with lived experiences getting youth work trained and knowing the skills of informal education, democratic and inclusive practice, conversation, the power of conversation, negotiation skills, conflict resolution, and all of those things that are really important to get that young person from A to B.
That's really insightful, that is. And so leading on to my final question, is there a particular story of you helping a young person that, you know, you're particularly proud of, you know, sort of he or she's gone from this and now they're up here and they're really achieving, you know, great things? Have you got any like standout stories, standout moments?
Oh, good one. I've got loads of the kind of similar stories. So I'll tell you one that's personal to me and I love it. Before, I'm not too sure if you know of Tanaya Sam.
No.
TSA Associates. Okay, so Tanaya Sam, at one point in Birmingham, obviously, you know, Birmingham, West Midlands have always been known for two gangs. Post the Peaky Blinders, there's always been two gangs that's been known, the Beggar Bar and the Johnsons. So this particular individual was known to be of one of those groups. And when I was younger, growing up in Hockley, Winson Green, he was what we would consider now as my older. And he was an individual that at that time was, if you look at what grooming is and what exploitation is in this context, it was the exact same thing. Me and my friends were so inspired by him, everything that he'd done. I actually remember my mum and dad really didn't like him because he used to knock the door for my older brother. And, you know, he used to want my brother to come outside and have a fight and stuff in the playground. And it was something that my brother wasn't really involved in, but I just really found him inspiring. And then when I got to about 15, 16, he went on the run, I believe, from an armed robbery that he was involved in. When he finally got caught, I think he was given 10 years of a sentence. And then following that, he came out of prison. So whilst he was going through that, I'd lost contact with him. I didn't see him from probably when I was about 15, 16 years old, maybe. So you got to think that from 17 up until late 20s, I would have went to college, in and out of college, had my basketball injury, discovered that I wanted to be a youth worker, went on a few youth work courses, got my degree in youth and community studies, left university, started working for the youth service, started to do my master's degree in criminology. And then when I got the job at UCB, I was assigned to develop a program under the EU Gangs Project called Responding to Gangs and Serious Youth Violence. It was a level 3 qualification. And the attendees were ultimately individuals that had come from prison, come from a particular lifestyle, and the university was going to train them at a certain level to be able to engage with children and young people. And one day I was driving to work and I seen him standing on the corner talking to another man that I know, and I just pulled over and we gave each other the biggest hug, and he was like, "Craig, where the hell have you been?" And I'm like, "Where the hell have you been?" And I said, "I've been living in Leicester. I was at De Montfort University and whatever." And he was saying, "Yeah, I've been in prison and whatever." And I was like, "What are you doing with yourself now?" And he was talking about, the guy he was talking to was a mental health worker that runs an organization around mental health. Can't remember it from the top of my head. So he was saying, "What are you doing?" And I'm saying, "You know what? It's crazy that I've just seen you, because we're just now taking applicants for a course around responding to gangs and youth violence. And he was like, yeah, I've been doing mentoring and stuff in prison. A lot of the new prisoners that have been coming in, I've been helping out with this organization called Use a Voice. And I was like, jump onto the course, it's free. He said, how long's the course? I said, it's 1 year. We were given, I think, $750,000 to do the work. So the first cohort ever tried and tested were all free applicants to get onto the course. And I remember him joining onto the course and he was like, yo, I think I'm dyslexic, you know, I don't see the purpose in this course and whatnot. But bottom line is he completed the course a year later, started his organization, TSA Associates, and now Tanaya is utilizing sport to engage children and young people across the country doing training and development. Now, so when I engage with young people, I can tell you other stories, but I'm going to say for this particular individual, this wasn't one of those lived experiences. Oh yeah, I was a little bit of a bad guy. I went to jail, came out. This guy was at the real end of what we understand gangs to be. It wasn't halfway in. It wasn't on the periphery. It wasn't just a name that was just saying that he was a part of the group. He was someone that was really involved. And to see that 360 and be one of the individuals that would have supported his desistance, that's one of my highlight stories.
Wow, just goes to show that anyone can change their life, can turn their life around. That's amazing. Amazing.
And I say to young people, if he can do it, they can.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the young people I'm working with haven't shot after young people. They haven't harmed young people in the ways in which those individuals in the 90s, if you remember Birmingham News, the stuff that they was involved in. But I don't take away the fact that they've still got different challenges in 2020 and beyond. So that's why I'm very careful about utilizing people with lived experiences and also using my lived experiences to not make young people feel like I'm undermining them.
Yeah,
what they
I suppose
call
like you say,
now.
Yeah, it needs to be very relevant because we're living in an ever-changing world, more drastically changing one at the moment. But no, thank you very much for answering the questions. It's great to speak to you. I'll hand back over to Andy.
Oh, thank you. Craig,
Yes.
as I say, thank you for being part of our Motivation Inspiration project. I've got one or two questions left before we finish.
Yeah, sure.
Thinking about motivation and inspiration at the moment, and obviously, you know, we're talking about people who have been in lockdown for such a long time. Restrictions are starting to be lifted. How does that relate now to obviously people who have struggled for the last couple of weeks, been really frustrated, are now seeing things that are happening that possibly I can't really comment on, but you know, shouldn't have happened. You know, how does that, in retrospect, support, and how do we support those people who have had that anxiety, have struggled? How do we push for and give them a message to support, obviously, the NHS, the key workers, and those people in lockdown?
I predict that there's going to be a ripple effect of the impact of COVID-19 on one's mental health and people's mental health in general. We're talking about fatigue, stress, boredom that's been building over the last 9.5 weeks. And I expect to see a rise in more mental health issues, more young people in risky behavior, more issues around exploitation, more issues around domestic violence. So what needs to happen as a response? There needs to be an investment in the services that were there before, but even more so now during COVID-19 and prior and post COVID-19, because what we are going to see is almost like a recession, because you've also got to bear in mind a lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of people were unable to bereave properly because they couldn't even go to their grandparents, aunties, uncles' funerals. We're talking about young people that would have been involved in some sort of risky behavior that may have put them into contact with the police, that may have caused a series of issues. You've got issues around family now destroyed because of issues around domestic violence. I had an issue this morning. A mother contacted me and sent me some WhatsApp pictures of a boyfriend hitting her in front of the kids. He's never hit her before. So there's all of those issues now where this is no justification, but because of fatigue from different households, people are almost feeling like they're on top of each other. And if you haven't got a nice spaced house like some people that come from areas where, you know, you've got 3 bedrooms upstairs or 2 bedrooms, you've got a living room downstairs, and you've got another room, and you've got a kitchen, You've got space where you can either go away from people. Well, imagine you're in a household where it's just one room and 2 rooms upstairs, and there's only a TV downstairs, and all of these things are impacting people's mental health. That's causing them to either be more risky or causing them to do things in terms of the household, like self-harming, suicide is now on the rise. Issues around young people utilizing new highs. Lean is another thing, so they're not just smoking weed anymore. You know, they're taking cough syrups, codeine mixed with Sprite and putting in a Jolly Rancher sweet, shaking that all up in a Sprite bottle, and they're drinking that but not understanding the impact of constantly drinking medicines that you're supposed to take for a cough. Is some of them things that they're taking have opioids in them, so seizures, fits, young people having heart attacks, brain aneurysms, and all of these different types of things are now starting to happen. So as a response, again, we need to understand the context of what's happening to young people, what's been happening to young people in COVID-19. That gets us to think, when our children start going back to school and engaging in the community, as Owen mentioned in terms of trauma earlier, if we're not going to start getting trauma informed right now, we're just going to be chasing the fire, and we're going to just be like firefighters.
Wow. Thank you. I mean, it's a massive insight. I mean, you're talking about, I mean, I started this 8-9 weeks ago, and that's down to because I really frustrated and thinking about my participants and the people that I work with. They're isolated on a regular basis anyway because of their conditions or the disability or the issues. And working in Queen Alexandra College, we have over 300 complex disabilities, which having that train to support that is really hard. And obviously, when you talk about COVID-19, you talk about the fear factor. So going back into that environment, back into the working environment where you can't make that kind of contact is really difficult, as you say. Yeah. So again, what would you say to support? I mean, the NHS themselves are doing a fantastic work, the key workers. What would you say? How would you motivate that or give that motivational message?
We can give them. We need to advocate to give them a pay rise to start with. I think the clapping incentive I think is good, but I think this is just I'm not a political person, but I just like to think that people risking their lives for us. I think there needs to be some economic benefit that comes with that as well. And I think there's going back to kind of Hannah's point as well about social media. I think there's loads of things we can do on social media to let them know that they're appreciated. I seen something I don't know if you've seen it. I seen Uber done an advert the other day. I thought it was really good. So it was like loads of people just saying thank you, Mohammed, thanks Abdul, thanks Simon, thanks whoever. Just thank you to the Uber drivers that have been supporting the NHS. And I thought something so simple that was 12 seconds. We could do stuff like that as teachers. All you need is someone that knows how to edit. And we could put things like that out there. And I just think that, at times when, if we can't give an economic value to the work that they're doing right now, I think there's other things that we can do, and, raising people's confidence and giving people hope and raising their self-esteem when people are feeling low. Because, I know a lot of friends and family that work for the NHS and they're worried, having to work on COVID wards when normally they wouldn't work on COVID wards, and they've got children and then they're worried about what should they be doing. And even with the protective clothing that they've got on, they're still concerned. They're talking about people dying on the ward, or they're hearing about one of their colleagues or a doctor dying from COVID-19. We're not just talking about trauma of the society, but we're talking about trauma of those professionals too. So I would also argue and advocate that those individuals need trauma therapy. Those individuals need to be counseled as well, because, we're watching death at a rapid rate. And you just look through history where these things have happened. Anything post has always had some sort of ripple effect. So I would like to hope that what we can do for individuals that work in the NHS is give them hope and incentive that we are behind them. We are engaging with them from afar. And I think we can do that in a range of different ways of saying thank you, because all we can do at the minute.
Craig, thank you very much. One last question before you go.
Yes.
I know you're a busy man. And finally then, thinking about a quote that supports motivation and inspiration, and you know what's going on around lockdown, what would your quote be and why?
You got me today on that one, Andy. I would use the quote from Frederick Douglass, a very short and simple one. Without struggle, there is no progress. And the reason why I'm saying that is because to understand the context of children and young people and families and individuals that have been impacted by COVID-19, it enables us to know what and how to respond. And ultimately, if we don't respond, we can't be upset and disheartened with what's about to happen next if we don't utilize the time right now to understand, to learn, to educate each other about after and post COVID-19, about the reality of children and young people in today's society.
Craig, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to meet you and chat with you. We could have chatted for longer, I'm sure, but obviously I know you're very busy. It's, you know, thank you so much for doing our project, and hopefully this will be shared across social media. What I'll do is I'll share the recording with you first, and if I've got your consent, I will share it.
I'll give you my consent right now.
No worries.
And there's one thing I want to do though, because Owen, the way he's standing, is almost like he's doing the Black Panther sign there. So I'm going to say, I think we all should leave on a Wakanda forever type of sign. Come on, Hannah, get your arms up. Go on, Owen. Come on, Andy.
There you go. Take care, Craig. Thank you very much. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.